Good morning. I'm Zigmund Rubel, sitting in for Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the Center for Innovation's Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. The mission of the center is to catalyze innovation in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry for a better tomorrow for all people. So we thank you for joining us today. We'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to the many sponsors who make our work possible. Thank you. Before we get started with today's presentation, I'd like to let you know about another project we were working on. The Center's Board of Directors are working in partnership with a Ukrainian nonprofit called Dobrobod that does emergency repairs to homes and hospitals damaged by Russian attacks. Dobrobod has requested that CFI present innovative ideas for Ukrainian reconstruction to local and national government leaders on July 28th in Kyiv. And that happens to be where Margie and a few others from our board are traveling at the moment. Courageous leaders in Ukraine have been tasked by President Zelensky to not only repair infrastructure damaged by the war, but also begin planning for peacetime reconstruction. Estimates of the reconstruction costs are close to $1 trillion, making this the biggest opportunity for large-scale innovation in our industry since World War II. The free conference will be live streamed with the simultaneous English translation. Should you care to join, the registration link will be in the chat box. Please join us. Now, for the event you've been waiting for. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to let you know one thing. The session will be recorded and placed on YouTube, so please don't say anything that would embarrass anyone who's proud of you. Today, we're delighted to hear from Dave Weiner, the Program Director of NSF I-Corps program at the University of California, Berkeley, and Dr. James Gunther of Constructive Interference Solutions Technology Consultants. Dave is a Program Director for Bay Area I-Corps Node. Prior to joining UC Berkeley, he was an early hire at Springboard, a mentor-led online learning education technology startup, and was the lead administrator for the public school choice program at the New York City Department of Education. An academic at heart, Dave holds a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from the University of Colorado at Boulder, an MPP from Georgetown University, and was a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. James Gunther is the Chief Science Officer at the Mariposa Technology Organization, developing AI algorithms, research, and funding proposals. He received his doctorate in biochemistry at the University of Tennessee and has authored publications on multiple topics. He directed a biotech program and worked with NS Fate. He consults for academic private industry, specializes in SBIR funding, which we'll explain what SBIR is in a second, and is chapter director for Startup Grind New Orleans, and an entrepreneurial community that connects millions globally. I will start the presentation. Oh, who am I? My name's Zigmund Rubel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forsight Digital, a technology company focused on data-driven processes to plan and program healthcare facilities. I have over 30 years of architectural design experience and worked on over 20 million square feet of healthcare facilities. I'm one of the founding board members and treasurer of the center and a member of the AIA College of Fellows. So you might be wondering, why am I here? Well, I founded 2 venture-funded startups. So let's begin the presentation. Do you guys see my screen without? Yep. Okay. So we wanted to start out with what's in our title. The title is very generic and basic, but what our presentation today is really going to talk about is non-dilutive funding, which means the government, and Jim will go into a lot more detail on this, but the government happily gives out money without taking anything from your company. And that's great if you are a young company and don't have anything to give up. So Jim's going to talk about the non-dilutive funding part, and Dave's going to focus on the work that's needed in validating the use case of the business model that one pursues. So we wanted to create just a very simple title, but we're going to be drilling down into the weeds onto what it takes to start a company. So who is this presentation for? We know that our audience spans not only the US, but throughout the world. And what we're going to be talking about today is really for US-based companies. However, much of what Jim and Dave are going to be talking about is applicable to foreign countries. There's just different program names. So if you are in Europe or Asia, I'm fairly confident that your native country has similar programs that supports startups. So please continue watching, but you may have to do a little bit of research. So some factors to consider. If you're thinking about starting a company, and we're not here to scare you, but more educate you, the numbers are not in your favor. So according to the Small Business Administration, 20% of all small businesses fail in their first year, 50% fail within their fifth year, and about 90% fail by their 10th year. And the biggest reason for failure is running out of cash. So we're going to try and address that. But the reason why you run out of cash is that you're not selling enough of your product. So that's what we're hoping to address in our presentation. So before I transition to Dave, someone had told me in my kind of startup journey is a startup a business in search of a business model. And there's probably a whole nother session that we could offer on business modeling. But I think both Jim and Dave are going to be talking about the real basics of what any startup needs to be for their business model. So I'm going to stop presenting and pass it over to Dave.
Thank you so much, Zig. I will my slides up. I hope everyone can see this okay.
Yep, you're good.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here today. Great to be here. As Zig mentioned, my name's Dave Weiner. I am the program director for Bay Area NSF I-Corps. That's a program housed at UC Berkeley, traditionally for founders coming out of Berkeley, UCSF, and Stanford who have startups or startups idea to help them de-risk launching a company. But we also work with just early stage founders and some early stage startups in the Bay Area as well. I'll share a lot more about the program and the why today. It's really a program that's geared towards the earliest possible stages of translating new technology or even just an idea. Ideation stage is perfectly timed for this into a startup. It's all about a methodology that we call customer discovery, which is really getting an exploration and a deeper understanding into who your customer is and why they're your customer. Because entrepreneurship at its heart, I would define it as just solving problems. And because of that, anyone who really wants to help other people or to help solve their problems has a great background to be an entrepreneur. So all backgrounds are welcome and on equal footing to do customer discovery and to do NSF I-Corps. We have a lot of extremely technical or academic backgrounds. So if you're a PhD student, postdoc, or a professor, you do this program, it's very likely you have zero experience with business, entrepreneurship, scaling the business, any aspects of that. We also have either current MBAs or those who have done MBAs in the past, or just serial entrepreneur types who have launched successful startups, come back to do it again, but all fit in perfectly with this methodology, because at its heart, entrepreneurship is about solving problems. NSF I-Core helps you to identify the biggest problems or the most urgent needs that your customers or potential customers are facing. And ideally, you can solve them. So as I mentioned, this is process is called customer discovery. And not that long ago, when you were looking to launch a startup or a business, you wrote a business plan. I actually did that with my first venture. It's really long, talked about who my customers were, my market, my 5-year plan. In retrospect, a lot of guesswork. Now we know there's a much better methodology to de-risk your venture. Let's just get out there and talk with people. And yeah, when you hear the term customer discovery, at least when I first heard it, I thought, well, yeah, I mean, of course, that's how you start a business. You go out, you discover who your customers are, and you start selling to them. That's how you grow and then build a startup or a business. But actually, the opposite tact is done with this process. There's no sales involved in any way. You'll never really discuss your technology, your product, or your solution. You don't present your project in any way to the people that you're talking with. In fact, if you're doing it right, you'll never come up. You'll never be mentioned. It's really all about listening and learning. What are their problems? What are their challenges? What are their needs? What are their priorities? The term customer discovery, I would say, is a little bit of a misnomer. I would really define this process as getting a much deeper understanding into all the different stakeholders who will influence whether or not your technology, your solution, or your product will ultimately be adopted. And that could be a lot of different people in a whole ecosystem. Likely end users, they may not be your actual customer, the actual payer. Decision maker, sometimes there can be more than one. How do they make these decisions? How do they decide whether to buy something or not? What data do they need to see? And there could just be influencers, those who aren't making the decision, they're not writing the check, but they influence the decision-making process. If you're in a space like biotech or in the life sciences field, that might not be applicable to many in here. But a lot of times there's regulators that you also need to understand, how to navigate that system. And so getting a deeper understanding into each one of these stakeholders, what they need, what their problems are, and how you can help solve them is really key to launching any successful startup. So Zig just mentioned, my numbers are even a little bit higher. This is just one article. There's obviously no exact number, but what we do know is most startups don't make it. So the real question is why? And I would argue most startups fail more so for a lack of customers than a lack of product. This is a postmortem that was done, this is a few years old, on why startups don't make it. I would argue most, albeit not all, of these reasons come back to lack of enough customers, lack of enough willingness to pay, not enough product market fit. That's when you identify a need in the market, you build a solution that customers want to buy. No market need, not enough customers, not enough of a willingness to pay, not a big enough market. Ran out of cash. That's just another way of saying you don't have enough customers who have a willingness or want to pay enough for your solution. Get out competed, that could go a little different ways, but that's part of it. Again, not enough customers, not enough of a scalable business model. Pricing cost issues, they're not willing to pay enough that you have a scalable business model. Product without a business model, okay, that one's a little more linear, but not all, but many of these reasons come back to that same root. Not enough product market fit, not enough of customers who are willing to pay enough. A few weeks ago, had a conversation with an acquaintance of an acquaintance, really super sharp founder. They have a Harvard MBA. They had worked in product and for one of the things, I can't remember which one, for a number of years. They left their job about a year ago to launch a startup. and they did what they thought was the exact right thing to do, which is an intuitive thing to do, which is go out there, talk to people, uh, present the solution, get feedback, really listening to that feedback. And that's what they did. And sort of I caught them at the tail end of the year when they were lamenting that really things did not work out. And they couldn't figure out why the startup had failed. And they said everyone loved it. Everyone I talked to loved this idea. But I spent a year building a product that nobody wanted to pay for. Seems totally contradictory. So how do we avoid this sort of contradictory outcome and this sort of doom? You always have to remember customers don't care about your technology. They really deeply care about their own problems and their own needs. And doing these sort of tech product focused interviews, presenting your solution, user interviews, user feedback, which definitely can be very valuable at some point, but these most early stages, before you really even launched, sort of doing this presenting and getting this very direct feedback can really obscure what you want to learn. And that's for a few reasons. One, no one wants to tell you that your baby is ugly. So you really need to get the unvarnished truth and the understanding. And sometimes you might not get that. But there's a lot more to it than that. There's a startup that I just started working with, I'm sort of helping them navigate this process. Two doctoral students at Berkeley, one of their dissertations was on whether or not teachers would desire to and adopt a new technology in the classroom to help students with ADHD. A great mission, and they sent out surveys. They did sort of qualitative data finding with interviews, but a lot of it was just asking, what do you think about this? Would you use a new technology in the classroom? By and large, every teacher was enthusiastic about it. Most, at least, not all. So they really thought they'd validated a need here for an app or a platform, research-based, that could help teachers better teach, better support these students. But at the end of the day, they really didn't find out that much from that. I would say there's a lot more to be learned, and they really don't know about the willingness to pay to start. Yes, teachers said they would want it, but would they pay for it? Are teachers the ones who actually pay for new technology, like educational technology in the classroom setting? I don't know who does, but my guess is it's not the teacher, probably a principal or maybe someone at the school district who makes this decision. And what they care about or how they decide to do this may be highly dependent on what their needs are, what is important in their job role, what's their budget, how do they make these decisions, and also just the user flows. Teachers might say they'll use it, but what is really their day-to-day like in that classroom? Do they have time to pull out a phone, dial up an app, impute things in the middle of class? Would they do it after class if it's not in class? How much time does it take? And will it work seamlessly with their flows? And that information will actually dictate how their product should look too, and what they're able to do. So doing this sort of rote survey data is a good start, but you really have to do what we call customer discovery interviews. That's asking a lot of open-ended questions, really trying to suss out what are their flows like, what are their challenges in their day-to-day, what are their biggest problems, really trying to drill down and understand who cares, why do they care, and how much do they care. I'll give one last quick example, but I won't spend too much time on this. Another startup I worked with, Michigan professor, expert in, he was an eye surgeon, expert in orbital disease, developed a corneal wound healing agent in the lab, like 3 years of work. Helps if there's a corneal abrasion for them to heal 50% faster, and enables, instead of doing LASIK, there's a better procedure. It's a little more invasive, but the outcome is better. And because the corneal can now heal faster, the invasiveness evens out with LASIK. So better procedure, same healing. So what doctor, when you ask them if they would like this, wouldn't say yes? Who wouldn't want either their patients to heal much quicker or to be able to do a better procedure with better outcomes? It turns out at the end of the day, when we really drilled down and started talking to eye surgeons, this was a nice to have, but not a must have. And as we asked them, hey, walk me through the last time you performed LASIK, from the start to the finish, how'd it go? There's really just not a lot of follow-up with patients. Yes, maybe a day or two after they'll check in and maybe they'll see them in a week or two, but there's just not a lot of investment. So this isn't a really big problem that these doctors face. So they're not going to really fight for this. There's not like that much urgency for them to invest in this. Yes, they would say they would want it, but how much? There's also always a cost of switching. So you always have to present more value than the current landscape or solution. And in our case, there's a big cost of switching with this flow, because if you're a doctor, you may have just invested in the last year or two LASIK equipment. You don't want to get rid of that to have to buy all new equipment for this different procedure. Yes, it may be better, but the marginal benefit just wasn't enough. So you really have to find, we call it different terms for it: hair on fire, shark bite, not a mosquito bite, just an irresistible, a big enough urgent problem. If you can solve that with your solution, independent of presenting it, just hearing it from them, this is the biggest problem I face, that's product market fit. And that's a really magical thing to have. So some best practices on how to do this. To start, you just guess the job title of who you think your customer might be and start reaching out to them. You could be wrong. That's okay. You're applying the scientific method to business. You're making hypotheses and going out and talking to people to validate or invalidate them. So you take a guess at who the job titles are and find them, and always use, you may not be able to use the student researcher card, but avoid using saying you're a founder, you've got a startup, or this is a project you're working on, because immediately the boundaries come up. They're thinking sales, and it's really hard to get a stranger on a call if they're thinking you're just trying to sell to them. So if you're in I-Core, you can say you're a student, of course, even though professors say they're students, but any way you can thread that needle and not present what you're doing, I think will make it a lot easier to foster these connections. Praise them. Hey, thank you so much. I would really appreciate it. You're the expert in this. I would love to just learn from you for 10 minutes more about this. And again, don't mention your technology. It's not about you. It's all about them. You really want to understand their needs, their problems, what their flows are. So asking for 10 or 15, aim for 45. Much easier to get on someone's calendar if you're just asking for 10 or 15 minutes versus 30 minutes. And then asking all these open-ended questions. Oh, can you tell me about how you currently support students with ADHD in the classroom? Things like that. What are your biggest challenges? What are your 3 biggest challenges as an eye surgeon, or when you perform LASIK, or as a school principal, or in a classroom dealing with like vagaries of students? Can you walk me through the last time for the team I mentioned? Can you walk me through the last time you adopted a new technology for use in the classroom? Have them take you through the entire flow of that. How did they even learn about this new technology? Who are the different stakeholders who had to decide whether or not to pay for it? And so you can really learn from start to finish how the decision process is made, and who are the different stakeholders involved, and hopefully what they care about. And even better, potentially, they might even tell you, oh, this is what we paid for this technology. Then you can start to put together data points on like what might I be able to charge for this. So we do this process it's really a de-risking process. Before you go out and build a product, go in one direction, thinking you know who wants it and why. Validate it first. So that keeps you from going very far in one direction, investing your time and money, having to backtrack if you learn that's not your market. As that one founder said, I built something no one wanted to pay for, and then going in the right direction later. But it's also will really help you to improve your fundraising odds. This slide is for the NSF SBIR. This is just one data point. I know there's sort of slightly different data out there on this. And Jim's going to talk a lot more about the SBIR in just a minute. this non-dilutive funding from the government, this specifically for the National Science Foundation. Without doing I-Corps, the win rate's about roughly around 14%. I think it's about 45, 46, 47, 48% if you've done I-Corps. So a massive, massive leap. And that's because you can, if you really for anyone, whether it's a government agency seeking to give non-dilutive funding to sort of higher risk, higher reward startups or companies, an angel investor, a venture capitalist, if you can go to anyone who's looking to invest in you, in your company, in your idea, your technology, and say, I've spoken to over 100 stakeholders, and here's what I learned. This is what they told me their biggest problems are. I heard over and over again, this is the biggest problem facing them. And I can solve that problem. My solution can help them solve that. And this is what they said their willingness to pay is. So I really, I know I've got a scalable business model. I just now need the funding to go out, build my product, go to market. It's a very powerful thing to be able to say to any investor. So quickly, just so you all know a little bit more about the actual course that I direct. Each month we offer a 1-week course. There's absolutely no cost to it. There are 3 remote sessions, usually a Monday, Wednesday, Monday cadence from 5 to 8 p.m. For any Northern California founders or those who just have a business idea that you want to validate. Is there a market for this? It does have to be technology based. It is about, so 9 hours of class time, not unrealistic to say it's about 20 to 30 hours outside of class. It's a busy week. It's a startup within a startup, but every minute you put in, you save 20 minutes that you would otherwise invest outside of the class. You do have to do it with a team. It can be 2 people, 3, 4, even 5 would be fine. As I said, early stage startup or just a startup idea. During that 1 week, you'll conduct 15 customer discovery interviews to really validate who your customer is and why, and to accelerate finding product market fit. Last thoughts, this is just our next course coming up. You can apply at bayicorps.com. Deadline is August 4th. My email is up here. I know Jim will share that at the end after his slides as well. And if you have any questions at all about the process, the program, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm going to stop sharing there and hand it off to Jim.
Yeah, Jim, I just wanted to share one thing that Dave mentioned to kind of tease out, and that is you don't have to have a company that's formed or incorporated to do I-Corps. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah, I'd say it's actually quite rare when you've been incorporated. This is something that's why early stage is perfect. It could just be an idea that you think could be a business, or maybe you've started on it, but you don't have to quit your job and do it full time. You don't have to be deeply incorporated. I'd say the vast majority that we see we call them teams. It's just it could be 2 people with an idea. But yeah, that's pre-product is the right time to do it.
Okay, yeah, because I just wanted to make sure that we CFI wasn't promoting this idea that you need to go out, quit your day job, and then do this. We're saying start early, start asking questions, understanding what the problem is, and then once you know what the problem is, then you could listen to Jim's part of the presentation. But I just wanted to tease that out. Okay, I'll
exactly
mute my
right.
mic.
Okay, perfect. First, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk today. I really, SBIRs have been something that have been passionate for me for about 7 to 10 years now, from the first time I heard about them. And actually through my time developing a biotech program at a community college, I had always thought about how do you take technology transfer at a community college and start bringing that more into the mainstream, especially in high-end, high-tech fields, which is, again, developing that biotech program was in a high-tech field. And so it's something that I've always been, passionate about, is giving students and even faculty new opportunities And what I love about SBIRs is that they have a lot of times a focus to them. So it gives you a starting point to work with. So the title of my slide today is Unlocking Opportunities, Non-Dilutive Small Business Innovative Research Funding. And so that's SBIR stands for Small Business Innovative Research Awards. And non-dilutive, really, as we've touched on earlier, means that you're not giving up equity for that funding that you would normally do if you go through venture capital or your Series A investors, things like that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to kind of jump into the idea and a little background on SBIRs. And so I'm going to start off and I'm going to talk mostly about the Small Business Innovative Research Awards, or SBIRs, but I am going to touch on the STTRs, or Small Business Technology Transfer, and I'm going to talk about some of the differences there. They're very similar to each other. They're considered sister programs of each other, and so there are some slight differences there, and I'll touch on that 3 times in the slides here. Most of the work that I'm have today comes from SBIR.gov. It's an incredibly good website. They have tutorials on every aspect of SBIRs. And so I pull a lot of information from there and I go back to that all the time when I'm working on projects. So SBIR program was established in 1982 under the Small Business Innovative Research Act. And it actually has to come up for renewal. And last year it did come up for renewal. There was some controversy along with that, but it was renewed last year. And so we've now got it going again for another couple of years. The program was initiated to address concerns that federal research actually went to large corporations and universities. And so there wasn't a way to, or mechanism to get small businesses involved in business or technology innovation. So they use this as a way to stimulate technology innovation, again, meet the federal research and development needs. So you'll see that these are needs from large parts of the government, from large entities or organizations in the government, and they put out requests for proposals for their specific needs a lot of times. They're set up to foster and encourage participation in innovation and entrepreneurship by women and socially or economically disadvantaged persons. And they're ways to increase the private sector commercialization of innovations that come from federal research. So they ultimately want you to be able to sell this product or develop this product, not only for the government, but also for other private ventures there. And that's a big part of it. And so really the best way I've ever heard small SBIRs put to me is that they're set up to de-risk that early stage, what are considered high risk innovative startups. And so if you have an idea that's truly going to change the world, but it's a really risky idea, this is a way to help de-risk that. Now, the STTR part of this are actually set up to foster technology transfer through universities or large federal labs. And so that's kind of the difference there. And in a nutshell, I'll come back to this, but the SBIRs, I usually tell people, if you're a business owner, that the SBIR is the route to take. But if you're working at, let's say, a university, the STTR, and you've developed at that university groundbreaking new technology, the STTR is probably the way for you to go there. Okay, and so that's beyond that, there's the way the proposals are written and the way they're put together, very similar. All right, so first question here is who can apply for SBIRs? So the SBIRs, they're all going through basically the Small Business Association, and we follow the guidelines for what is a small business. And so first of all, you have to be organized for profit, and your place of business has to be located in the United States. You have to have 50% owned or controlled by individuals that are citizens, permanent residents, aliens of the United States, or if it's owned by another company, that you're a subsidiary of another company, that has to be 50% or more owned or controlled by the US citizens or the United States or part of the United States. And then finally, you, as part of a small business, they're listed as no more than 500 employees, including affiliates. There are some other rules that are specialty rules that are in there, but that's really the main rules that you're looking at for SBIRs. Okay, now the STTR awards, again, are a little bit different here. So the small business awardee, so it's initiated by a small business, but it has a specific partnering institution, such as a federal lab or a university, and they have to establish an intellectual property agreement beforehand, basically. So they have to do the paperwork for that technology transfer. Now, the STTRs require that the small business perform at least 40% of the R&D, and that partnering research institution performs 30% of the R&D. So that's built in or baked into an STTR. And so finally, the STTR will allow the principal investigator or the person who is heading that project to primarily stay or remain employed by the partnering institution. So if you're a professor at a university, STTR is probably the way to go because it allows you to remain employed by that university while conducting that STTR. And so that's the big part there. Now, at the bottom here, I've got, do you need a PhD to apply? This is probably the most common question I've asked all the time. And the answer is no, you do not. You don't need an advanced degree, but you do have to demonstrate with yourself or your team that you have the skill sets necessary to accomplish the goals of the proposal. And in fact, I have a very good friend of mine that's incredibly successful out of these. He's a business person developing ball valves, basically, or new valve systems. And he told me, he said, Jim, I don't know anything about engineering, but I know how to put a really good team of incredible engineers together. And we've applied for these proposals and they're doing incredibly good with it. So, you know, you don't have to have an advanced degree is my point there. So don't let that, you know, push you out of this idea. Now, what are the SBIR agencies and how are they set up? So there's basically 12 agencies that participate in SBIRs. Now, the first one is the SBA, but they don't actually provide any type of grants or contracts, but they serve to coordinate all of the program there, okay? Underneath that, all of the other 11 federal agencies that are listed here, they have budgets for R&D that exceed $100 million. And as part of that, they have to allocate 3.2% into SBIR programs. Now, in addition to those, 11 agencies there that have that $100 million budget, agencies that have over $1 billion in reserve will have to allocate 0.45% for the STTR program. And so there are currently 5 out of these 11 that have those large budgets. And I'm not going to go into the details of that right now because it's not necessary, but and they have not only the SBIR programs, but they also carry STTR programs in those 5. So all 11 have SBIR, 5 out of those 11 have SBIR and STTR programs. Now, each agency has their own individual flavoring, you could say, for their guidelines and what they're requesting for. So the format of each one of these proposals is different. The way you submit them is different. The portals for submission are different. And the information they request is different for each one of them. And so this leads me to one of my things that I'm going to bring up at the end. And a lot of people come back to me and say, well, I just want to, put one proposal together, and as a shotgun approach, I'm going to send it to everybody. And that's really a method in my mind for failure. I always suggest that you go straight to the solicitation and you write a proposal very specifically for that solicitation from that organization. You can always go back and take that material and rewrite it for something else later, but focus is the key to these things. Okay, so SBIRs are actually broken down into 3 specific phases or steps that you would have there. Okay, and so I'm going to really concentrate on the phase 1 and phase 2, and I'm not going to go into phase 3 because that's only in some cases. And so phase 1 is where you would typically start here, and in this you're trying to establish the merit of the technology. Does it actually function the way that I think it's going to function? So and this is really hypothesis-driven research. So let's say I've come up with a new technology for coding for aircraft carriers that's going to make them invisible to radar or something else. Your question there is, does it actually work the way you think it's going to, or the way you've developed it in a lab setting? And so your phase 1 would be used to address those questions there. Now, phase 1s are typically pretty short. They're only range in time for about 6 months to 1 year. And they're not a whole ton of funding here, but again, it's a good bit of funding. So they range, depending on the agency, anywhere from around $50,000 to $250,000 for a phase 1. If you're successful with that phase 1, and this is an interesting point, that if the phase 1 is not successful, if it doesn't meet the goals that you put forward in the hypothesis, that's not a problem. And what I mean by that is that doesn't count against you. They want honest research, and it's better to stop at the end of a phase 1 and say it just didn't work the way we thought it would, than try to keep moving forward. Okay. And that doesn't keep you from writing another phase 1 in the future, is my point there. However, if your phase 1 is successful and it looks really good, then a lot of times you'll move into and put together a phase 2 proposal. Now, these are much larger, more intense proposals. And in these, you'll continue with your research and development. However, you will have a lot more of the commercial potential put into the phase 2. So your commercialization strategy is going to be really important there, and it's going to be brought out in the phase 2. And these are typically much larger awards, and they're usually a larger time frame also. So here they say $750,000. Typically, it's about 1.6 million is what I've seen as the high side. So 750 is low, depending on the agency, and almost up to 2 million is the high side. And they run for about 2 years. In some cases, you will move forward after a phase 2 into a phase 3 with commercialization, but that's it. A lot of times you're not moving into a phase 3. So phase 1 and phase 2 are really the 2 parts to be concerned with here and to think about. Okay, so what's the landscape of SBIR funding? And so this comes from Department of Defense, and in fiscal year 19, they actually had a total amount of about $3.2 billion that were spent in SBIRs. And you can see, if you go into this first pie chart, that Department of Defense actually has the largest amount of SBIR funding. I think it's right at 47%. Health and Human Services is right underneath that. And then all the other agencies are listed here. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out with this is that Department of Defense here actually is broken down into multiple subsets here. So you've got Navy, Air Force, other defense agencies, and the Army. And so each one of these actually has their own SBIR program underneath Department of Defense. So like Air Force has AFWorks, which is incredible. It's a really great website and program to if you want to take a look at that. And so, even if you don't see, your or some of the agencies listed as the broad agencies, you'll see that if you drill down to it, they do have other agencies listed as subtopics or underneath that. And again, as an example, Health and Human Services, NIH, or National Institutes of Health, is listed under there. Now, I wanted to bring this up because, again, I find SBIRs fascinating, and I think that they're one of these overlooked engines for driving our economy. And this again comes from Department of Defense. And I just wanted to mention that for every dollar that's spent in SBIR funding, they estimated in their reports that it's about a 22 to 1 return. And that's just an amazing return on your investment. You know, when you think about, you know, really good things that are coming out of this type of technology and these types of awards. And so again, I think SBIRs are just an amazing, mechanism that the government has put together. Okay, so to kind of switch topics here. So I wanted to talk a little bit, about one of the success stories for SBIRs, and this is Green Building Studio, and they received an SBIR in 2005, and this actually was an SBIR. They went through phase 1 and phase 2, and originally with the EPA was their funding agency. And so basically they looked at, you know, one of the requests from international agency about existing building materials, and they highlighted their need. Their need was to design buildings that minimize energy use and conserve water throughout the world. And so what they did was, if you move down here, I just wanted to kind of skip a little ahead, is they developed a program or software that assesses a building's energy, water, and carbon emission performance. The assessment previously took weeks, to do this type of work. But using this program, they could be completed in minutes at a lower cost and using the building information modeling tools. And so this was a real benefit and saved time for the end customer here. In 2008, they actually had about 6,000 customers. And in 2008, they were bought out by Autodesk, which actually is part of the AutoCAD software program, which most of you or some of you are familiar with, and it was incorporated into that. So this is a real success story of taking something from the earliest development stage, running it through phase 1 and phase 2, and then finally an exit strategy. Okay, so then there's a ton of great success stories out there for these. Now, I also wanted to talk about some of the open announcements right now. And so the first two that I have here are from Department of Defense. And this one is based on, they're looking for a non-refrigerant based cooling for cabins, basically. And so you can think about, you know, the applications for this when you're looking at electronics that are found in a lot of small cabin spaces now. And they go through, this is just the short form of the request for proposals. The whole solicitation is much larger than this, but this is just the synopsis of it. And so basically they say that they need to get away from and they can't use hydrofluorocarbon-based cooling systems. They also don't want anything out of the automotive industry because there's a flammability or flammable issue to that. And so what they want is for you to design a non-refrigerant based cooling system that directly supports the Army climate strategy. And if anybody's interested in this, the first thing I thought about this was the Peltier devices for this type of work. So if anybody wants to work with me on this, I'm happy to talk. Okay, the other one, and this is probably pretty close to home for a lot of people on this call. And again, this one comes from Department of Defense. A lot of times people are really, excited or amazed to find out that Department of Defense has a really incredibly broad range of topics, beyond just what you would think of for military applications. They're amazing. And so this one is for designing of sustainable building materials or technologies. And it's an open topic. They call it a broad agency announcement. And so you'll see that this is a really broad topic for you to take your ideas and kind of funnel into this. So it's not a narrow, system here that they're looking at. And so what they're really looking for is they're looking for a way to address the carbon intensive aspect of military operations through disruptive materials. And so they go through, the different ideas or things that they're looking for. And then they look at applications here. And so they say that they want efforts that are focused on the following technical areas. And so low logistics, indigenous material utilization, sustainability centered materials by design, scalable, sustainable building material technologies, forward waste utilization for sustainable low logistics manufacturing, low energy bio-based building materials, terrestrial carbon sequestration materials and technologies. Now, a lot of times, if you have something that doesn't quite fit with this, one of the things I would do is suggest that you talk to the actual program officer. And I'll mention that at the end on how to do that in a moment. Okay. And the last one, this actually just closed, but I wanted to give you a different type of SBIR that comes from a different agency. This comes from the Department of Health and Human Services, and you can see that underneath HHS, this is actually the National Institutes of Health that had this out. And they want an e-learning system for hazmat and emergency response. And this is a pretty broad topic also. If you go down through here, they're looking for new ways to train people for hazmat workers, waste treatment personnel, emergency responders, workers involved in biological hazard response, infectious disease response, medical waste cleanup, disaster repair, and worker resiliency training. So you can see that all of these, very, very similar, but they have their differences for each of them. And so they want to, they want some type of advanced technology like mobile devices, virtual reality, serious gaming. But if you have something that's groundbreaking that doesn't fit into those little categories there, again, I would talk to the program manager and see if it's a good fit. Okay, so that's kind of my suggestion here in looking at these. Now, the last parts here that I wanted to mention is just some of my guidelines when I work with companies or individuals that are putting together or thinking about SBIRs. So in general, if you're a small business or a small business owner, I would apply through the SBIR system, okay? You can still set up your collaborations as a sub-award through a university or federal lab. But it removes, in my mind, a lot of the red tape that you would see in trying to put together an STTR and navigating the university system. However, so for an STTR, if you work at a research institution and you develop some new novel technology there, and you plan to continue your work at that research institution, then I would put it through as an STTR. And that's really the main difference. There are some differences in the way you put the awards together, but that's not important for this talk. I recommend a 3-month window to develop and write the SBIR, STTR proposals. And in fact, the previous 2 that I showed you from Department of Defense, I think the window for them closes in December. So there's time for that, is my point. Yes.
Jim, I think we're almost out of time.
Okay. I can stop at this point then, and we can take questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could put up the last slide.
Sure. That's us.
Excellent, thank you. And then Dave, we had one question that I thought maybe you could answer, which is, how do you define a company that's technology based?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, we always just say any sort of like STEM technology or innovation. So any engineering innovation, any science innovation, you don't have to have necessarily novel IP or a patent, but something where you can point to like some innovation you have. It wouldn't be like, I'm going to do an e-commerce website. I know that's sort of like an amorphous definition, but anything where you can sort of say I've got like some form of a STEM innovation. But if you have something in mind, feel free to email me. I'm happy to do like a deeper dive offline. And if it wouldn't be a fit even for our I-Corps program, I'd be also happy to do like just a 20-minute like console call to like give you some best practices on how you can still apply the same methodology to your idea.
Okay, great. I don't think I'm seeing any other questions, and given that we're almost at the top of the hour, I'm going to say our
There might
deepest
be
thanks.
one more, actually.
Are there? I don't see them.
I see an open one.
Oh, yep, you're right. It's a bit out of context, but I'd like your opinion about work with a tech partner while you're funding a startup. Imagine that I discovered a need for a solution. I want to build a product, but I don't have knowledge about the technology. Is a red flag working with the software factory, for example? So,
I was gonna say, I'll probably field that one.
yeah,
I don't consider that a red flag, and I don't think that would be an issue. What I would suggest there, and you know, so this is actually how I got into a lot of this, is I would suggest starting with, you know, one of the universities that, or one of the federal labs that you could work with there that has expertise in that field. And then for me, one of the things I do with a lot of my clients is I try to steer them to one of the community colleges out there that actually has a high-tech program. And so there are about 300, a little bit over 300 programs that have advanced technology programs in a ton of high-end fields. And you know, that's another option. So there's several options out there, or you can just, you know, contract directly with a development company or a professional company there. There's a lot of ways to go about it.
our deepest thanks to Dave and Jim for such a valuable presentation. As you know, we've recorded the session and placed the recording on our website, centerforinnovation.org, in about 24 hours. Our webinars are now available as podcasts as well, so check it out whenever you download your podcasts. If you have questions about the Innovation Lab or the center's work in Ukraine, reach out to us using the Contact Us link on our website. Special thanks to the amazing April Willoughby for all of the behind-the-scenes work for CFI projects. Finally, if you're not a member yet for the Center for Innovation community, please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter to receive updates on the many innovation webinars and events that we host each year. Being on the newsletter is absolutely free. Thanks again to our sponsors who make all of this possible, and to all of you who make our community of innovators to do the transformation in our industry. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much, everyone.